I'm Susan Mulholland, and welcome to Artbeat. Tonight we have three very different segments for you. First, we visit a truly Renaissance man, David Paige, who is an actor, an artist, a poet, and a playwright. And then we travel to the Hicks Art Center to visit artist Robert Dodge. And finally, we'll introduce you to three charming boys, the Bergman brothers, at their school, the Children's Academy of Music.
Now, there was a group of high school friends that came from
David Paige lives in a converted schoolhouse with his wife and three sons. He is quite charming with his Paul Newman blue eyes, which twinkle when he talks about his work. David's description of himself will endear him to all the women in our audience, I'm sure, as it did me.
I'm a father and husband first. And all of those other things are the things that make me really happy besides being with my family. How's that for a real conservative answer? But I mean it sincerely. I know that many artists have that kind of historical perspective that the art was their everything, and that their relationships bit the dust and everything else went off the deep end for their art. Well, for me, the family is what gives me the energy to do my art.
I asked him where he gets the ideas for his plays.
I get my ideas from everyday life, very ordinary things. The dust under the bed, the telephone ringing, the unexpected as well as the expected. I think the plays that work best are the ones that we can all relate to, and we can't all relate to extraordinary events. We can relate to what's happening in all of our lives. I find my themes and my plots in my everyday existence, and driving down the street and looking at somebody out watering their lawn, riding on a bus and hearing a conversation, all those places.
If I Knew Then was a play of David's, which was recently produced at the Annenberg Center.
I'd love to. That was one of the greatest experiences of my life. Before it went to the Annenberg, it was at a wonderful theater in Skippack called Playcrafters Theater. I have a great deal of respect for the organization there. It played in Skippack for 4 weeks, and on opening night, I was just so excited because I knew I could feel it clicking. I could tell when the actors were up there that I wasn't sitting in the audience thinking I'm watching actors. I was living something with these people, and apparently some other people thought so too, because at 7 o'clock the next morning I got a phone call from the man ahead of a foundation saying, "I want that play, let's see if we can take it into the city." And that's how it got to be at the Annenberg. The idea of this play came from my turning 40 last September, and watching all of my friends who were in that same age bracket turn 40, and how differently we all accept, face, or fight the idea of turning 40. I had an idea in my mind based around a certain character whose name came immediately. I called him Brad Bader. And this man was turning 40, but for Brad, at this point in his life, everything was X. His hair was X, his marriage was X, his children were X, his job was X. At 40, he had lost everything, even his dreams, especially his dreams. He was the kind of guy who graduated from high school, and in the yearbook they said, most likely to, but he didn't. And he wanted to be an artist, a photographer, a fine artist, but instead he ended up doing weddings. That was the transition he made of reality and many other things. So by the time he was 40, he's living in a rundown apartment in Philadelphia and very depressed. His furniture was Salvation Army collectibles. He only had claim to one thing that he really called his own, and that was a moth-eaten moose head that hung on the wall. Now, there was a group of high school friends that came from the same block that he lived on when growing up, who decided that they were going to go cheer him up, counsel him, maybe get him to go for therapy, who knows. And there were 4 very interesting characters. There was Sherry, who had become quite successful, and she had a specialization in makeup and clothing, and she helped people in that way. had a number of shops that she owned and ran. Her husband, who was a plastic surgeon, very successful also. And then there was another guy there who had become a health spa owner and had a number of gyms that he operated across the city. And then there was his old high school love, Laura, who was a psychologist. Well, they came in on him, and the end results were this. Well, he had lost everything except his wild imagination. And in that group of people, he saw that they could give him the second chance at being young. He could take that college scholarship that he had passed by. He could be 22 again. He could go the distance. And he convinces them that with the plastic surgery skills and the psychological skills and the health and bodybuilding things and the makeup and they were going to put a wig on this guy and that would go the whole distance and he could become 22 again and live his life over from that point where he was the one most likely to. And this time he would succeed. And the play picks up at that point. And he discovers many things along the way. He discovers that he cannot be 22 again, but he has a great time discovering that, and so does the audience. The play is based around an opportunity for all of us to laugh at ourselves a little bit. September's People was produced at Playcrafters Theater also. I think it was in 1982, and it still to this day is probably one of my favorite pieces of my own writing. You know, we have your favorites of your own things. I loved the characters that came to be in this play, partly because they came out of pieces of me. I think a writer often does that. A writer maybe draws his characters out of other characters that they come in contact with, but he puts his own words in their mouths. And lots of interesting things happen. I wanted to put people of contrast together. I wanted somebody to talk about love in an interesting, intimate, sensitive way, and then have to be challenged by somebody who was hurt by love and maybe went down a back road because of love or turned their back to love. I wanted to talk to two different people and have them say things, maybe like one man in this play refers to the idea of peace and joy as being something that is within our reach. And then I wanted a very argumentative person to come up and dismiss that and give the other side how it's totally out of our reach, that we will never reach that peace. And why I wanted this kind of a challenge to take place is because I think all those people are inside of each one of us. That we are always battling the idea of, can we have it? Will we? Is it possible? And there's days when we think, yes, love is mine. And then there's days when we think, I've missed love forever.
David tells stories through his art, just as he does through his plays and poems, although his medium is different.
The paintings that I'm currently working on I find very interesting because they really are pointing up local history. I'm looking around at old farms, the old bridges, old roads, and capturing before they disappear. But these paintings are a melding of the old and the new, because the person who commissioned this work wanted them bright and abstract and hard-edged and filled with color. And I think this is kind of nice, because this is what we all have to do. We're living in an age that is now. We can't keep yesterday here forever, but we can take the best of yesterday and work it in new ways. And that's what these paintings are. Very hard-edged, abstract views of old bridges, old bicycles, yesterday's fields, old barns.
We visited Robert Dodge at the Hicks Art Center on the campus of Bucks County College to find out about his architectural layering. Background as far as art goes.
Yes. I did an undergraduate degree at the University of Pennsylvania in political science, and I realized that that really wasn't the direction that I wished to take.
Yes.
And fortunately enough, and had some experience on my doing art for myself mostly. And as I got to undergraduate career, I realized this was not the direction I wanted to go into. And I was fortunate enough, teacher who convinced me to go to graduate. When I was very lucky to get into graduate school, I was the only one else.
Right.
I've initially worked with the figure for about a decade, and then I had the wonderful experience of being able to go and live in Italy for 2 years on a pre to Rome as a sculptor, unlikely things, but to go to Rome, and different ages of architecture had to do with the city of Rome.
Yes.
And I became sensitive to the different architectural styles and the different mediums and the different forms that architecture could take. And it was really on the basis of that experience, those 2 years and subsequently another visit to Rome, that I've been able to incorporate those ideas about world architecture into my work, into these, to the elements which I consider important parts of my work.
I think Rome has a way of always being with you once you've seen it, doesn't
I think
it?
that that's definitely true from all the people who I've come in contact with who have been to Rome.
Right.
Rome is really a very special place.
And so this is where this exhibit really can be traced back to a lot of that influence.
Oh, and that as it becomes part of my inner being, the images keep occurring, and in a lot of ways, as I work on these pieces, and I think of a particular color, and I think of a particular shape or texture, I can imagine specific buildings or specific places that I've been, and it really gives me the opportunity to relive much of that. So I think an artist always wants to try to gather up those things of his experience, put them out there for people to live along with him.
Well, let's talk about the elements that you're trying to show through this work.
Okay. As I've looked at world architecture, particularly the architecture of Europe, with which I'm most familiar, I've noticed that the major architectural buildings have certain elements that are in common with each other. All buildings, all architecture deal with some element of proportion, how the height and the width and the length relate to each other. And I got very interested in studying the golden section as it relates to the Parthenon in Greece. Some of it has to do with my teaching, that I try to incorporate in my classes an art historical background, so that the students are not painting and drawing without some idea of where all this information comes from. So proportion for me is a very important part of how you compose a picture. I happen to choose, in the case of the Parthenon, the golden section, which is a
Yes,
ratio.
review that for us, because some people may have forgotten that from you.
It's somewhat of an obtuse concept, but it's one that's used all the time by artists, whether they know it or not.
Yes.
And it's a aesthetic sense of proportion of height to width, and it actually Pythagoras came up with a formula of this, which is a ratio of 1 to 0.618, which means that when we look at something, we view it as being pleasing, and most of the time it's this particular proportion. We see it in nature all the time. The most commonly used example of it is the nautilus shell. That the ratio of the different chambers of the nautilus shell conform to this mathematical principle, and that's what Pythagoras basically did, was to observe nature and formulate a mathematical formula for this proportion.
Don't we usually see the picture of the man with the arms?
Yes, that is a Renaissance concept
of the Pythagorean theory.
Of the Pythagorean theory, and it's a drawing by Leonardo da Vinci, which tries to show the ratio of man to the golden section.
So how man feels about buildings has a lot to do with this proportionate that the designer has done, or the architect has done.
Yes, I think that's certainly true. I think that the Greeks were certainly aware of this in terms of how they proportioned their temples, the Parthenon, of course, being the one that I'm referring to, in terms of the height and the width and the diameter of the columns and the spaces between the columns and the height of the base upon which all of these fit, so that it had a human relationship rather than overwhelming the man. It was trying to incorporate the man. Even
now, how do you use that in what you do?
Okay. Initially, although it's not as major an element in my work right now, initially it was the proportions of the height and width of the piece.
Itself?
Yes, to itself. In some of the pieces, a spiral is used, which is representative of that Nautilus spiral. Again, a mathematical relationship. And within the piece, there's always one element. You'll notice as we look at the pieces that there are rectangular elements within the piece. Most of those rectangular elements are based on this proportion of the golden section. Initially it was the whole picture plane, but now it's usually just one or two parts of the picture plane that are part of the proportion.
Robert, will you tell us why you use this black and white grid in your work?
Black and white grid really is one of the most important elements to me in the work because it represents two things, two parts of architecture that you can't escape. You can't have architecture without a space inside it. So the white is the positive, the black is the negative. Very obvious symbolism, but it's the idea that with a structure you have a negative space inside to where all the activity occurs.
And so that's what that represents?
That represents, but it also represents, the grid itself represents both the color and the black and white, represents a modular unit, because all architecture is based on some sort of measurement unit and some sort of material unit, whether it's a brick or whether it's an I-beam or a slab of plywood or whatever it happens to be. It's still some sort of unit around which an architecture has based his measurements or his module or whatever. So that's a really important part of all architecture. And I think that as people look at the world of architecture, you begin to see not just the building, but how it's put together and what's used to build that building.
And then calligraphy.
Yeah, the calligraphy sort of evolved over a period of time as I started thinking in abstraction about architecture, and as I was reading about different architectural structures that interested me, I realized that there's a whole level of information that's been evolved about the architecture from the architect's initial drawings and plans to the art historian's analysis to the archaeologist's discovering. So it's a bunch, what I ended up finding was that there's a series of layered information about a structure. So what I tried to do in this was to have a calligraphic segment, which is one bit of information, then I'd paint over that, and then I'd write in another section, and then I'd paint over that, and then write into another section. Not real words, but symbols that symbolize writing. So it doesn't mean anything. But
let's hope.
Yeah, well, let's hope it doesn't, right?
Let's see, as a last question, you are a teacher.
Yes.
Do you feel that that is a very valuable component in being an artist also?
For me, it's been a wonderful marriage of how to earn a living, a consistent living, and also something that nourishes my work all the time. The students are really very important. They come up with ideas that I couldn't possibly comprehend or think of myself. Although I'm not sure that I'm directly, it makes me think about things that I might not think about if I were in the loneliness of my studio.
Yes.
Although teaching is really a wonderful part of my life, and I enjoy it very much.
Well, Robert, thank you so much for taking your time today.
Okay.
I know our
Thank you
viewers have
for
enjoyed
coming.
this.
All right. Thank you.
The Academy of Children's Music is the only Suzuki school in the Philadelphia area. It is here that over 400 students attend to study on violin, viola, cello, piano, and flute. The school is located in Fort Washington, Pennsylvania, and it was founded by Robert D. Pasquale, Philadelphia orchestra violinist, and his wife, Ellen Fisher.
Well, the Academy of Children's Music is really unique among the musical institutions of this city because we're the area's only Suzuki music school. And as a Suzuki music school, you have a very specific mission. Your mission is to offer all children, regardless of their musical ability, the opportunity for musical accomplishment. This means that you stand in your community holding out the promise of a happy and gratifying entrance into the world of music for all children. It also means that you consider your students to be children first and musicians second. I think that's why the Bergmans are here. Certainly, at their level of musical competence, these children would fit in to Juilliard. But their mother feels that it's important for them now, while they are children, to have the opportunity to be children. They'll have a lifetime in which to be musicians, and that's why she's chosen this school rather than a school like Juilliard. What the school does is says, if you have tremendous musical promise and you need a wonderful teacher to develop that, we'll offer you that. And if you don't have a great deal of musical promise, but you want to have your child love music for the rest of his life, we'll do that too. So the choice is really essentially that of the family. The Bergmans have chosen to give to music the kind of commitment and the kind of dedication that is going to develop every single iota of musical promise, and there's a lot of musical promise within those children.
How did your left hand feel? It was a little stiff, and it looked like it was...
At the beginning, it felt more stiff.
Music becomes a part of a child's life, and it stays with them for always. Even if they're not, and naturally, all these children will not go into music seriously. A small percentage will. But it opens doors for so many things. There are chamber music societies where they can join and go all over the world and play chamber music, wherever they go, whatever city. There are amateur orchestras they can play in, which keeps the interest in the playing ability alive, and it's enjoyable. And so there are many things for these children to do later on in life, but also it gives them an extra skill later on in life when they have to go to college and they're asked, well, do you do something other than academia? Sure, I played a violin, I played a piano, and I think this also helps in their future. So it has a lot of uses.
Sam Bergman is the oldest boy in the family. He just turned 13, is in the 7th grade, and he plays the violin. He's blessed with perfect pitch.
Well, I think music has an extraordinary value in my life. I don't think I'd be able to get along without my violin anymore. I basically started it because I've always liked sounds and harmony and stuff. I used to listen to records. I'd stand up and my mom would come in and sit me down because I wouldn't stop listening to records. And I like playing in recitals a lot because I like trying new pieces. I like playing the classics. I'm not into rock and roll that much like most kids are, and I just like to play a lot of classical stuff and sometimes just hack around on my violin. I don't think I'll choose music as a profession. I'd rather do something else. What I really like to do is journalism, but I think I'll always keep my violin as a hobby.
Andrew Bergman is the middle child. He's 10 years old, in the 4th grade, and he plays the cello.
Two laws in my life would be my music and any sport, really. I like music because I find if I have a day off where I'm not practicing, I get bored and I don't have anything to do. And so it takes up a lot of free time. And sports, it's just a lot of fun. It's a time where I get to be with my friends, and I've always liked running and that sort of thing, so that's just what I like to do best, probably.
Ben, at 8, is the youngest boy in the family. He's in first grade. Ben tells us why he likes the hard pieces.
It takes you a long time to get from, but when you get the piece ready to perform, you sort of like to see how well you're going to be able to do.
Well, I knew nothing about the Suzuki method or music. It was Sam who started us. He was right when he said I used to pull him down in a chair when he was 2. He'd stand in front of his record player, just transfixed, and it could be Mitch Miller, it could be Vivaldi, it didn't matter what. His love of music was so intense that after I saw him standing there for an hour and a half, I'd sort of pull his body down into a rocking chair and he'd stand back up when it was time to change the record. He was the one that started us in the method because he read an article in our local newspaper about the Suzuki method when he was 3 and said, "Mom, I want to play violin." He already had chosen that as an instrument and a sound that he liked from what he heard on records. And I said, "Oh, you have to wait till you're bigger." And he said, "No, look, see, it's for little children." There was a picture, I remember, of a little boy lying down in the grass playing. So I stalled and thought, I can't believe he really wants to do this, and that's all he wanted for his 4th birthday was a violin.
Hey, Robert!
Ben, over! Ben!
I saw that.
So?
The Bergman brothers don't live in ivory towers. They enjoy sports and games just like any other children, and they especially like to beat their father.
Uh-oh.
Bingo.
Check. I know. So do I.
As you can see, the Bergman family is a strong unit. Perhaps that's why they're so successful. Thank you for tuning us in. This is Susan Mahalan saying good night for Art Beat.